relocation of franchises is one of those grim realities of US sports. Unless you live in one of the biggest markets in the US, teams will come in and in due course teams will leave. For most of the history of English football, such a prospect would have been unthinkable. Not only that, it seems unimaginable that someone might even attempt to test the norms, to snatch up a team from one part of the country and drop them elsewhere. Imagine somebody one day bought, Southampton and decided to relocate the entire club to London and name them the London Saints. It would be absolutely absurd. And imagine the amount of uproar that would happen. Well, that has actually happened in English football before, and it is why one of the fiercest rivalries in football has been born. So let's take a deep dive into the crazy story of MK Dons and AFC Wimbledon, one of the most controversial moments in English football history. Sit back, relax, and listen to this incredible footballing story. Our story begins in Wimbledon, a small town in southwest London. Founded as Wimbledon Old Centrals, the club, Wimbledon FC, were a non-league team for most of their history. Nicknamed the Dons and later also the Wombles, they won 8 Isthmian League titles, the FA Amateur Cup in 1963, and 3 successive Southern League championships between 1975 and 1977, before finally being elected to the Football League. The team rose quickly from obscurity during the 1980s and were promoted to the then top flight First Division in 1986, just 4 seasons after being in the 4th Division. It was some achievements. Now, many people tipped Wimbledon to go straight back down in 1986-87, but after losing the first game of the season away at Manchester City, Wimbledon won the next 4 games to sit atop of the First Division. Wimbledon eventually finished 6th before their manager moved on to Watford. His successor was Bristol Rovers manager Bobby Gold. Dubbed the Crazy Gang because of the eccentric behaviour of the players, fans, chairman and their manager, the club's greatest moment came in 1988, when, very much against expectation, the team won the FA Cup. They beat the overwhelming favourites and top-flight champions, Liverpool, 1-0 with a goal from Laurie Sanchez. 37,000 Wimbledon FC fans witnessed Captain Dave Besom become the first goalkeeper to save a penalty in a FA Cup final to give them the FA Cup win. The only downside of this triumph was that the club would not be able to compete in the European Cup Winners' Cup, as the ban on English teams from European competition was still in operation at this time. Wimbledon's Crazy Gang became one of only 3 clubs to have won both the FA Cup and its amateur counterparts. In the saturated market of London football, it was was never going to be a club to draw crowds like Arsenal or West Ham. And despite having a very rich history, when the Taylor Report, issued in the wake of the infamous Hillsborough disaster, happened, it concluded that all Premier League stadiums or First Division stadiums had to be all seaters. Now, Plough Lane, which was the home of Wimbledon FC, was not up to standards. So Wimbledon had to find a new stadium in order to continue playing in the top flight. So, just days after the FA Cup triumph, Wimbledon directors announced plans to build a new all-seater stadium in the club's home borough of Milton. However, nothing came of the plans to redevelop Plough Lane into a new ground, and at the end of the 1990-91 season, Wimbledon's board decided that Plough Lane was beyond redevelopment to meet the new legislation which required all-seater stadiums. Consequently, the club moved to Selhurst Park before the 1991-92 season, where they were going to be ground sharing with Crystal Palace in a deal that lasted way longer than either side might have wished. Despite this, Wimbledon remained in the top flight for many years, eventually even booking a place in the inaugural Premier League season, reaching multiple FA Cup semi-finals, and even qualifying for a European competition. And sadly, eventually, Wimbledon, 12 years after their FA Cup victory, were eventually relegated to the second division. Now, their chairman at the time, Sam Hammam, failed to find a new home for Wimbledon in southwest London, and a Premier League club with no fixed home looked a rather appealing prospect. A proposed move to Dublin never materialised, but in Buckinghamshire a new retail park was completely free and could easily be transformed into a stadium. Milton Keynes, a town founded in 1967, also didn't have a football team. And so, the debate began. Wimbledon, in desperate need of a new home, their one and only viable option right now was to move to Milton Keynes, a place almost an hour and a half away from Wimbledon. In August 2001, the club officially announced its intent to relocate to Milton Keynes. And in May 2002, the FA appointed an independent commission to rule on whether Wimbledon could move nearly 60 miles north. Now, despite heavy protests from fans, by a margin of just one vote on the FA Commission, the move was approved by the FA. Now, the move was approved, but of course they needed to actually make the stadium and transform the retail park, so that meant Wimbledon were unable to physically move for over a year. And as a result, major organised protests at the decision continued to be held by Wimbledon's local support, and a boycott of the club's home matches at Selhurst Park meant attendances dwindled immediately, resulting in the lowest attendance actually ever recorded in a Premier League game. But unfortunately, that did not change the minds of those at the top. And suddenly, just like that, the team was basically stolen from their fans. was now 60 miles away from their fans. Indeed, Wimbledon FC had a greater connection with London. The player most identified with the heyday of the crazy gang, Vinnie Jones, was such a cockney person they even made a film career out of it. Dave Besson, Dennis Wise, Wally Downs, all heroes of the club, all came from London. Wimbledon's academy boys Jason Hall, Chris Perry, Carl Court came through the ranks before being sold on for sizable returns and were all local lads. It was a club that was representative of London. They had boys from North, South, East, West London, and they all came together to play at Wimbledon. When the time came to head up to the M1, it was those from the Wimbledon Academy that were tasked with the impossible task of winning hearts and matches. It was definitely not what these youngsters had signed up for. But you see, the story doesn't end there, because the Wimbledon fans, they had a plan. They would not allow their town to be robbed of a football club. Long before the Wimbledon players were going to Milton Keynes, those fans had come up with a plan. Indeed, there were only 2 days between what their supporters would consider the death of Wimbledon FC and the rebirth as AFC Wimbledon. On May 28th, Rory Stewart, Ivor Heller, Mark Jones and Trevor Williams led a meeting at the Fox and Grapes pub on Wimbledon Common, and while the anger was far from gone, it became apparent that there was no realistic way the fans could overturn the decision. Wimbledon FC was gone, but that didn't mean Wimbledon couldn't be without a football club. So began the process of imagining up a club from scratch. It really was an act of creativity. Best guesses at how much was needed to run a football club and how much they could actually finance. Stewart estimated that they would need around £15,000 to fund AFC Wimbledon's first season. A season ticket of £200 ought to cover that. They ended up with around £80,000 raised, as the Wimbledon fans generously donated towards their new club. They'll need players too. Open trials brought 230 players down to Wimbledon Common. Their new manager, Terry Eames, a former Wimbledon FC player, was convinced it was a wind-up. On July the 10th, 6 weeks after what seemed to be the end of football in Wimbledon, AFC Wimbledon played their first ever match, a friendly against Sutton United from the next town. To show the sheer amount of support that the Wimbledon fans gave to the club, kickoff was delayed twice because there were simply too many supporters turning up to watch this friendly. Now, AFC Wimbledon would go far, and they would go very fast. In the 2002-2003 season, AFC Wimbledon competed in the combined Counties League Premier Division, the 9th tier of English football. The owners had set a ludicrously over-ambitious timeline of 10 years to reach the Football League, which of course was just never going to happen. Well, in the playoff final at the Manchester City Stadium on the 21st of May 2011, in front of a crowd of 18,000 people, AFC Wimbledon beat Luton down in a penalty shootouts. The victory resulted in promotion to the Football League and represented the club's 5th promotion in 9 years. The club's achievement of attaining Football League status After just 9 seasons of existence, it's considered to be one of the fastest ascents for a new club ever, and was even faster than the owners expected. AFC Wimbledon also hold the record of being the first club to be formed in the 21st century to make it into the Football League, making them the youngest club in the Football League by some distance. It was almost poetic that Wimbledon FC, which saw a meteoric rise up the Football League into the First Division, which people did not expect, AFC Wimbledon would have the same rise, a unexpected, rapid ascent to the Football League. Now the rapid rise somewhat stalled as they consolidated in League 2, but then came the 15-16 season in which AFC Wimbledon achieved promotion again, this time to League 1 for the first ever time. Now this was going to change everything, because that same season, a certain club from Milton, Keynes were relegated from the Championship, meaning the 2016 season would see a long awaited derby day. You see, I've told you about the town of Wimbledon and how they rebuilt after all of this to become an established Football League side, and it was a great story. But you might be wondering, so what the hell happened to the original Wimbledon side after they moved to Milton Keynes? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Wimbledon fans didn't really take too well to the decision to move to Milton Keynes, and by announcing the decision a whole year before they actually moved, that whole year was full of fan protests, meaning attendance plummeted. They went from 37,000 fans watching the FA Cup final to an average of just 2,500 fans, which for a Championship side who had only just been relegated was abysmal. Anyways, in their last season at Selhurst Park before moving, with attendance very low, they finished 10th in the Championship before moving officially to Milton Keynes. However, the massive loss in revenue in ticket sales and merchandise, and of course the huge cost of building a new stadium, meant Wimbledon's finances were ruined, and they entered administration in June 2003. The administrator in charge of the club's finances sold any player who could command a transfer fee, and as a result, the team finished bottom of the Championship and were relegated to League 1. The club were brought out of administration at the end of the 2003-04 season, and a new club was formed. Pete Winkleman, he was the man who actually owned that retail park in Milton Keynes, and he was the guy who sold it to Wimbledon. As he technically owned the stadium, he decided to just buy the entire club. And well, by this point all of the Wimbledon fans had vacated the club and gone to AFC Wimbledon to support them. He felt, well, he might as well just completely reform the club at this point. And so he renamed the club MK Dons, as the Wimbledon nickname was the Dons, and they were in Milton Keynes. Anyways, they would fluctuate heavily, dropping to League 2, but eventually climbing back into the Championship. But in 2017, it was time for the almighty clash. Now, the two teams had managed to play one game in the Cup before this, but that was in Milton Keynes. The 14th of March 2017, however, was the day MK Dons would return to Wimbledon, going to AFC Wimbledon's new grounds, Kings Meadow, in a league clash. AFC Wimbledon would triumph 2-0 in a 5 AFC Wimbledon not acknowledging the Dons parts of the MK Dons name on their scoreboard, simply writing Wimbledon vs MK. Anyways, over the next few years the clubs would meet some more, but there was still another twist in the story to come. On the 13th of December 2017, AFC Wimbledon received permission to begin work on constructing a new 9,300-seater stadium on the site of Wimbledon Greyhound Stadium. The new ground would only be 250 yards away from the original plough lane. The club also were eventually able to secure another season in League One with a draw in their penultimate game, meaning that for the first ever time, AFC Wimbledon would be playing in a higher division than the Milton Keynes Dons, who were relegated to League Two that season. And in due course, AFC Wimbledon would come all the way back. The impossible dream of football at Plough Lane, a 9,000 all-seater stadium in the heart of Wimbledon. It was created. In November 2020, the club officially moved to the new Plough Lane, coming full circle. Now sadly their first clash with MK Dons at Plough Lane was during COVID and had no fans. So the first clash with fans would be in 2022, ending 1-1. But it was actually this season that saw the rivalry flare up and sweet, sweet revenge. The 24-25 season sees both clubs competing in League Two. Wimbledon hosted MK early on this season at Plough Lane and thumped them 3-0, one of the best wins in the club's history in a very satisfying win. This was the win Wimbledon fans had been waiting for. Thrashing MK at Plough Lane. It was well and truly a full circle moment. And so, that brings us to the present day and the end of our story, where despite being formed almost 50 years earlier, MK Dons are in the same division as AFC Wimbledon. A modest club re-establishing itself at the heart of the community might seem like a local story, but its story of a community refusing to let football be taken from them should resonate with people around the world. Not all stories have a happy ending, but this one does. It could have very easily gone south after AFC Wimbledon was formed. They could have got stuck in the lower divisions and not really done too much while MK would thrive. Instead, perhaps it was the footballing gods who helped us here, as justice has well and truly been served, with AFC Wimbledon standing on their own 2 feet, battling MK Dons, and taking their club back. With all the money in football nowadays, sometimes as fans we do feel worthless and almost like it's not our club anymore. Well, if you ever get that feeling, just remember this story, as the small town of Wimbledon had their club taken from their hands. But if anything, it was a blessing in disguise, as they now have full control of their football club, and they are loving it. So there we go. That is the story of AFC Wimbledon and MK Dons. It's a mad one. But I'm sure some of you have heard of it before. If you did, then this was relaxing, and if you didn't, then hopefully you learned about a really, really fun and mental story in English football.